So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Ngozi Chukwueke, and I am an AmeriCorps Spark Fellow with the City of Santa Monica, and I work in our Office of Sustainability in the Environment. And on the side, I also write environmentally focused content for Brown Girl Green on Instagram. And today, this panel session is going to be discussing the relationship between climate resilience and religion, something that I've been curious about for a little bit. And we have three wonderful guests with us today that are going to talk with us about it. So today we're going to talk about the different ways that different places of worship really prioritize sustainability and climate resilience in their spaces, what that looks like for them, and what that could look like moving forward. So with that being said, I want to do a little bit of a land recognition and grounding exercise because I believe that is so important. So today I am calling in from Los Angeles, which is traditional Chumash land. And I actually encourage you all to use this tool ahead of time to figure out what native lands that you're on, so we can all practice this activity of land recognition. And I'll copy and paste it in the chat for you all. There you go. And I encourage everyone to use this tool and figure out where they are, what native lands they're on, because it's so important to recognize that and recognize our native caretakers of the land. And while you all do that, I do want to do a brief grounding exercise. It's been a really long week. I know for me, I've struggled with everything going on social media. So I just want to do a brief grounding exercise by reading a poem and hopefully just encourage everyone to breathe and take a deep breath and kind of remember who and where we are. So this is Remember by Joy Harjo. Remember the sky that you were born under. Know each of the star stories. Remember the moon, know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn, that is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown and the giving away tonight. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath. You are evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father, he is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are. Red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth, we are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind, remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember you are all people and all people are you. Remember you are this universe and this universe is you. Remember all is in motion, is growing, is you. Remember language comes from this. Remember the dance language is, that life is. Remember. So with that being said, I'm going to let our wonderful panelists introduce ourselves. They're going to tell us their pronouns, where they're calling in from, and a little bit about the work that they're doing. So let's go ahead and get started with Allison.
Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be joining you this week, this very eventful week. My pronouns are she, her. I am an architect in Santa Monica, California, and I am also the Green Living and Green Sanctuary Committee Chair for the Unitarian Universalist Community Church of Santa Monica. So it's really in that role that I'm participating today. Not sure how much detail you want in Ngozi, but I can.
Yeah, as much detail as you'd like. I also went ahead and posted the presentation file that's attached to our session, and this will allow you all to click on this and kind of look through some of that work that Allison is doing. So if you want to talk about any of that, you're welcome to,
Sure.
Allison.
Yeah, because I'm an architect and have been very committed environmentally, forever, seems like, since I was 14 at least, and the first Earth Day. Um, I have gotten very involved in helping the church to restore all of its buildings, which all tend to be pretty historic in an American sense, as in they were built in 1930 and 1960 and 1910. And so there's been the restoration of the whole church campus in a sustainable manner. And here in Los Angeles, that means not just very energy conserving, but also very water conserving. At the same time, it's an incredibly expensive process in Los Angeles to build anything or to restore anything. So it's been a real challenge for the congregation to make those difficult decisions about um, how to retrofit our campus to make it more accessible and more functional and more welcoming and more appropriate for children, uh, for our religious exploration classes, and at the same time to live our values in terms of sustainability. One of our key principles in Unitarian Universalism is a recognition of and valuing of the interdependent web of all life, of which we are a part. So that is really our environmental consciousness, which is kind of a fundamental value. We've also gotten very involved on environmental justice issues, and I'll probably have a chance to talk about this later, but particularly in South Los Angeles, which is a relatively less prosperous part of Los Angeles than Santa Monica, where we're involved in food justice and organic food production in a food desert situation. In partnership with a community-based organization that actually grew out of the Black Panther movement many years ago. So we have a lot going on. I want to give time for everybody else to talk.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Yoshi, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. So hi, everyone. It's really nice to be on here with you. My name is Yoshi Silverstein. I use he, him pronouns. I'm currently calling in from Shaker Heights, Ohio, right outside the city line of Cleveland, on land that historically has been stewarded by a lot of different peoples. To name only a few of them: the Erie, the Mississauga, the Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee, and probably about 50 more. That I couldn't name if I tried to all of them. My work, I'm a Chinese Ashkenazi American Jew, originally from Spokane, Washington, and my work, in a sort of most meta sense, is really working to create wholeness by healing the relationships between ourselves and our own bodies, ourselves and each other, and our relationships to community and to the earth. So most of my career, or the first part, I should say, of my career was in the Jewish outdoor and environmental education space. So spent time in the mountains, on farms, in the desert, at retreat centers, occasionally, on a canoe. So a lot of different places, teaching kids and adults of all ages. Also, Allison, I don't always mention this, but because of your background, I'll say I also took a little detour at one point and got my master's degree in landscape architecture. I don't practice in any sort of direct way anymore, but I loved all of the learning and loved just the really creative application of everything. So it's great to hear the work you've been doing with design. And part of that work that I did was also really thinking about Jewish vocabularies and frameworks for outdoor learning through a Jewish lens, which was a really fun thesis project to do. My current work is I'm the founder and executive director of Mitsui Collective, which launched a little over a year ago, just in time for a global pandemic. And we'll get in, I think, later a little bit more into the details of that. But the mission of the work is to build resilient community through embodied Jewish practice and racial equity. So really thinking about, again, what are the things that make us whole, that really allow us to be in our bodies, and also to understand where we have different needs for healing and wholeness, addressing the impacts of racism in our bodies, as well as taking on anti-racist work, not just in the head and not just the theory, not just, the cognitive, but really embodying that work and doing it in just in a way that moves it from thought into action and behavior. So thanks, it's good to be here.
Amazing. Yeah, as y'all can hear, we have some really heavy hitters on this panel today. So I'm so excited to be having this discussion. And last but certainly not least, Imam Safit, would you like to introduce yourself and the work that you do?
Yes, thank you, Ngozi. Wonderful to be with you all. We say in our traditional way within the Muslim community, Salam alaikum, peace, Shalom alaikum. We have various ways of saying peace, and peace with oneself, peace with others, and peace with the natural world. And it's a struggle. We need to recapture that peace. We need to liberate it from where it's being held, sometimes by MNCs and sometimes by the person next door. We need to work on figuring ways in which we can liberate this peace so we can all share in the blessings of this wonderful Mother Earth that we all share together. I'm coming to you from my home office in central Jersey. This is the traditional lands of the Lenape peoples. In our religious tradition within Islam, and I'm sure it's not unique to other of the faith traditions represented here this evening. We have this idea of when we visit the graveyards, we say amongst the prayers of blessing and greetings to the people of the grave who are living a life in the grave. We believe them to be alive. We say, Entum sabikun wa nahnu dahikun, which means you are the ones who came before us. You preceded us, and we will follow you. We will end up being where you are now. And it is a way of grounding ourselves, especially these days as an imam and Muslim chaplain at Drew University in Madison, New Jersey, and being an assistant imam in one of the major mosques here in central Jersey. It is responsibility to care for and to commend our brothers and sisters into the next world. And needless to say, it has been changed a lot in the way in which we honor them by washing and shrouding and then carrying out the funeral rites upon our brothers and sisters who have passed away, especially during this COVID-19 period. We ask God to lift this pandemic from all of us and grant health and well-being. And I'm glad our brother Yoshi is here to help us in that regard, health and well-being during this time of difficulty and of separation. But we have this concept that we always have to honor those who came before us. And those who came before us, of course, in this land, especially in the area that I live, are primarily the Lenape peoples. And they were people connected to other of the native and indigenous peoples of this land who knew what it meant to live a life in harmony with the natural world of which we are a part, not a part, meaning separated from, but we are a part and parcel of. And some of my work in terms of environmental work has been focused primarily within the Muslim community. I'm grateful to have been one of the first of 2 Muslim Green Faith fellows. If you're all aware, Green Faith program and Green Faith as an organization is one of the leading interfaith organizations for religious training and education and for commitments to making sure our lives are a mercy to the earth. And I was honored to have teachers from various of the faith traditions as we studied together what our scriptures, what our teachings speak to in terms of our environmental presence within the world, in terms of our eco-consciousness, in terms of the role that we as human beings have to play better I was honored to have teachers of one of my great friends, the late Rabbi Larry Troster, who was one of the leading figures in the Jewish movement. I know, sure you know him, Yoshi, and others. You know, we have to tikkun olam, right? We have to heal this broken planet. We need to repair it. And in the Muslim tradition, we need to reset the balance. And that's something that I've sort of committed myself to. In terms of the other work, I serve on the Parliament of World Religions. I was blessed to be with that organization for a little while now, and specifically their Climate Action Task Force. And once again, the recognition that this pandemic which we are facing and this climate crisis, climate emergency which we are all facing is something that never existed in human history before. So it is a first, and our religious traditions individually have a lot to say about it, but no one has the answer, I believe, by themselves. The only answer can come through us coming together. And that was actually one of the phrases for those of you around in 2015 and 2016 at the People's Climate March, both in New York and then the following year in Washington, D.C. In order to change everything, we need everyone. And this is so important for us to realize. We need to work together, because the challenge which we face is an existential challenge to all of us. And so I've done work through the Islamic Society of North America's Green Initiatives Committee. The Islamic Society of North America is the largest and oldest, it's in its 78th year now, I think, of existence, Muslim umbrella organization in America. And we focus a lot on this time of Ramadan, especially, and a time of greening our rituals, because religion at the end of the day is ritual, and finding ways in which we can green our practices. And Ramadan provides a unique opportunity, even during the limitations imposed by COVID, for the Muslim community for an entire month to begin to adopt a low impact lifestyle in keeping with what we hold as the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, lifestyle. One which we walk softly upon the earth in following the Quranic command, وَإِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا. The servants of the merciful are those who walk upon the earth softly or gently, lessening our impact on this world, so that the world which we have will be able to be passed down to the generations which will come after us, at least as we have it, but we should really work hard to make it better. And we've been doing exactly the opposite. So trying to raise this consciousness during Ramadan. I wish all of you happy Ramadan as well. Blessings of Ramadan to be with all of you. In addition to that, I've had the opportunity to work with some incredible leaders within the Muslim scholarly community, and I'll probably stop here, and that is on the issue of fossil fuel divestment. This is something that is very, very critical for us to understand, that even with the unveiling today of the Earth Day policy, and the 50% reduction by the end of the decade in terms of emissions by our new president, Joe Biden, it's not enough. 2/3 to 3/4 of the known fossil fuel reserves, natural gas, coal, and oil, need to stay in the ground in order for us to survive. If it's taken out, it's going to be burned. And this is critical for us to understand. There has to be a transformation, and here religious language, I think, comes into play, a transformation that takes place in our very relationship with ourselves, with the lives we live, and with the people and the creatures and the world which we impact. So I worked with religious scholars to develop a religious framework for basically making it sinful, or calling out the sin of fossil fuel burning, and the imperative, the moral imperative and ethical responsibility to divest and to transition to a renewable energy system. Not just for us, but for those who are seeking to get onto the electrical grid throughout the world. 800 million of our brothers and sisters on this planet do not have access to electricity. They have a right to access to electricity, but it needs to be done in a way in which it is based upon renewable sources. And that means we have to lead by example. In the Northern Hemisphere, the West, as it's called, the global North, in the political terminologies, geopolitical terminologies, we need to make a difference. And here in America, I hope we can do so. So once again, working together. And when we talk about pipelines, we're talking also about, Standing Rock. We're talking about issues right here within our own nation. And we're talking about the EJ communities impacted by the petrochemical companies or by the noxious fumes and the pollutants are coming out in the various port cities around this country. Here in New Jersey, we have, of course, Newark, New Jersey, and the Ironbound district, which is being tremendously impacted, and all the sacred lives of the people in that area being impacted because of the fossil fuel burnings. So something that is near and dear to my heart. Enough of my introduction. I think I've took longer than Allison and my sister Allison, our brother Yoshi. But just your brother in faith and creation, Safet Chadovich. Wonderful to be with you all tonight, and thank you for allowing me to participate in this program. Looking forward to hearing and learning from all of you. Thank you.
Of course, yeah, our pleasure, really. So Safet already touched a little bit on this first question I'm going to ask you all, but Allison and Yoshi, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. So what identities do you align with? This can be religious, ethnic, racial, and how do they inform your relationship with the environment?
I can jump in. So, as I mentioned a little bit, sort of religiously, but also more identify as Jewish. My family is Eastern European, Ashkenazi, Jewish lineage from my dad's side, which is religious and cultural and ethnic. It's sort of a lot of different things. And then Chinese American, my mom's side, from Canton Province by way of British Guyana, where my grandmother actually was born and raised before coming over to the States. Yeah, in terms of relationship with the environment, to me, it's a deep, the aspect of journey and the sort of search for rootedness is something that's really, it's motivated me in my life, and I think through really both sides of my family's life, of what does it mean to sort of be in diaspora from homeland, and both physically and also spiritually in diaspora, and sort of be in that journey. One of the framings, there's I guess two things from one from what Safet said that I was thinking about. One, I just want to put this phrase in the chat that I thought about. Safet mentioned Tikkun Olam, which is Hebrew for repair the world. This is and this feels apt for both this and also from Earth Day yesterday. This is a phrase from Kohelet Rabbah from a commentary on Ecclesiastes, which is attributed. The Ecclesiastes is attributed to King Solomon, and this is commentary on that. The Hebrew is Tein datcha shelo tekalkel v'tachariv et olami she'im kelkata min shetaken acharecha. So pay attention that you do not corrupt and destroy my world, for if you corrupt it, there is no one to repair it after you. So that's one sort of overarching phrase in terms of, I think, our role as stewards of creation. The other is a framing that I bring a lot in my work, which is a little bit more, well, it just brings us into the question of relationship to land and place. And there's sort of two roles or archetypes that we can think about in terms of what that looks like. And so the Hebrew for them is ger and ezrach. Ger is most commonly translated as stranger. So this is a phrase that folks may have heard. Usually comes up in some iteration of you, meaning like the Jews or the Israelites. You were strangers in the land of Egypt. Remember that as you consider how you treat the strangers in your midst, sort of like now, right? Which being ancient Israel and then all the communities in which we've built. So that word is ger. And then this other word is ezrach, which is usually translated as citizen. So it's sort of like the two sort of ends potentially of a spectrum, but it gets a little bit more complex and nuanced with that. And I'll say that really briefly. And the framing for this, I think, is that the language of Hebrew and also just the sort of primary experiences that gave birth to Judaism as a religion and as a people and as a way of life really had a deep relationship to place. Sometimes we say that that Judaism has a historically indigenous relationship to place, that has gotten very complicated over the millennia, but it was absolutely birthed out of a specific place. And we see that in the liturgy, in the language, in the practices, in the ethics. And so ger nizrach is an example of that. So briefly, the word ger has a similar word, gergir, which is used for berry. And so we can think of the berry that's gotten separated from its mother plant and is traveling around. So ger is the stranger, but it also sometimes is translated as sojourner, right? Like it's journeying. Ezrach is used as like citizen or as like the member of the community, but it also pops up in Psalms to mean a natively rooted plant. And so we see here that just like language of ecology that's just like part of the core fabric. And what I love about that is, one, is just the connotation of like a deeply rooted plant, like just there's so much lyricism in that, but also that we think like the gergir, the berry, eventually will plant itself somewhere and develop its own roots, and over time may become deeply rooted. And also vice versa, that deeply rooted plant will put off its own berries or seeds. So these are not fixed positions, they're dynamic, they're fluid. We experience both of them in lots of ways throughout our life, and also in different times or different places. Like you can feel like ger in one place and be in the same place and something changes and you feel like ezrach, or vice versa, like you feel like the stranger, or you feel like the sort of like deeply rooted. So that sort of journey has been really core to me, and I think it's part of what we as Jews, and also arguably as humans, like we're trying to figure out, like how do we really root ourselves in the experience of place and life and community in ways that sort of sustain and nourish us all.
That's amazing. I love that. Allison, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. You can tell from my name, I have a very boring Anglo-Saxon name, but actually my family history is as an immigrant. My parents are from Australia. So I think when I think about my heritage, it's really that I have had that experience, I guess, of being the sojourner or the stranger or the traveler, literally in the womb, from Australia to Canada, and then from Canada to Pennsylvania, and then from Pennsylvania in my teens to California, where I sort of felt like I was at home because there were remnants of all of those places and a great deal of tolerance for strangers, frankly. And then, of course, as a designer, I have, as an environmentalist, I have a great deal of interest in the whole idea of appropriate landscaping and the native plants. And in fact, the whole way that immigrants are treated. I mean, I used to carry something called an alien registration card, which was troublesome. I think that term really needs some thought. Indeed, living here in California, a lot of times Australian plants are alternately viewed as appropriate to the climate or invasive, depending on their impact on the native vegetation. So I think that whole idea of embracing diversity and yet honoring place, is a tricky one in nature. And it's kind of an interesting whole discussion. I've spent some time also in France, where my husband is from, and teaching environmental education there. And one of the really interesting things there about the concept of sustainability is that it explicitly deals with social equity. So the term développement durable explicitly deals with economics and equity, whereas here it's somewhat of an environmentalist is somewhat viewed as a luxury that has to do with sort of preserving nature rather than deep kind of balancing of competing human needs, the needs of other living creatures and of the ecosystem as a whole, which I think is a more useful concept in many ways.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. This idea that we're just taking care of something instead of the fact that we're all a part of something, right? We're all a part of the environment. It's not one or the other. So I completely agree with that. This next question, I'll start with Safet on this one. So how do you define sustainability and how would you define climate resilience? Is there a difference between the two to you?
Yeah, thank you for that. Let me answer it in this way, and just as my initial thoughts on it. When I sort of define myself in terms of ethnicities, I say, well, I'm an American Muslim of Bosnian Anglo descent. My fathers came from Bosnia and Herzegovina, the crossroads of civilizations, of religions, the flashpoints of the conflicts of those civilizations and religions. And we saw it very vividly in the genocide that took place in 1992 against the Bosnian Muslim people, the 10th that had taken place against them. But he grew on the land. He grew on as a farmer during his younger days and later on in his life, after surviving World War II and experiencing the genocide that took place upon our family members. Eventually ended up in the United States and became a botanist by profession. But he always connected us with this idea of connectivity to the land. And my mother was her parents came through Ellis Island from Scotland and England. And, she met my father where they were studying as graduate students at the university. They both connected us to the idea of the relationship with the land in the form of an ecosystem, in the sense that it was sort of like an eco neighborhood. And I think that that's sort of one of the things that's my takeaway when you speak about the issue of resilience and sustainability. I can exist in my home, provided that my neighbors can exist in their homes in safety and security. They have this idea in America called NIMBY, right? Not in my backyards. I think with climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, this has gone by the wayside. Zip codes do not prevent us anymore from being the recipients of extreme weather events and impacted by these horrific situations. They may provide us ways in which we can set up physical structures because of financial strength to somehow mediate some of the effects, but they cannot inoculate us against them. And so I think this idea of neighbors is something that was drilled into my heart and my mind, or exemplified by my father when, for example, we would spend a lot of time planting the garden with our hands, and then the bunnies and the squirrels would have at our tomatoes and have at our different types of vegetables that we placed in the garden. And I used to get angry, and I said to my father, why don't we fence the garden? He said, we don't have a right to deny our neighbors, meaning the rabbits and the squirrels, their portion of it. That being said, we did have a wonderful dog that we had as a pet, and she sort of scared away the squirrels and the rabbits. But and I was happy about that because we were able to have more tomatoes at the ending of the year. But I think that sort of stuck with me, this idea that neighbors are not just human neighbors, but are non-human neighbors as well. And if they're in a good situation, then we'll be in a good situation. I think all of our religious traditions speak about honoring the stranger, caring for the neighbor, providing security for them, giving when they are in need. All of that is not only a principle that is, I think, that drives our idea of mutual coexistence, but I think it's also a practical principle, because at the end of the day, if my neighbor's house is on fire, mine is going to catch on fire too. And the impacts of climate change are going to come into my backyard from their backyard. And so the idea of sustainability for me is ensuring first, in the first case, that which we have plenty of, if we manage it correctly for ourselves and future generations, is something we need to first share in the horizontal, meaning all the neighbors that are around us. They need to participate in that, human and non-human. And after that, those who will come after us. So the idea of sustainability for me comes out, for example, of a Muslim tradition in which, like all faith traditions, we encourage charitable giving. You know, we call it sadaqah in our tradition, means voluntary charity. And we also have a mandatory, what we call poor's due, or the right of the poor in the wealth of the rich. So in the wealth of the wealthy lies the right of the poor. So that's zakat, but separate from that, we have this voluntary charity called sadaqah. And we're encouraged to give as much as we can. But sadaqah can be giving by money, but it can be also giving by one's resources, knowledge, abilities to help others and empower them. And there's this very interesting saying of the Prophet Muhammad, in which he says that Muslims hold him as the guide, life guide and life example. He says that give, but do not extend your hand out too far, because you do not want to leave your children in a situation in which they are worse off than you are. Now, if we take this and apply it in the understanding of resources, water, air, food, that which we need to breathe, that's which we need to live, then we need to ensure that those resources are available for them. Because the fact of the matter is, when we humans came to this earth, being created in the image of God, being the children of God in the Islamic language, being infused with the divine spirit, when we came to this earth, there was a built environment, as my engineering friends like to say, and that built environment was in harmony with itself. We have the opportunity to enhance that, but unfortunately, we have done the opposite, especially since the Industrial Revolution, especially when we began to look at nature as an it, something which we only value according to its profit margins, its material aspects, and forgot about its spiritual components, which are connected to us, are necessary for a healthy living. With regard to, that's with regard to sustainability. With regard to resilience, and I think there's a good intersectionality with religious tradition here, because religious communities and religious teachings in general are about providing people resilience. And resilience, if you look especially at the issue of climate resilience, they talk about anticipating and preparing for factors and impacts of climate change upon oneself and one's community. You want to be resilient, you want to be prepared for it. Well, it's in a sense preparing for the unknown. The unknown is something what religious traditions try to speak about. We try to speak about what is beyond, what is there beyond, what is in the unseen. And we try to speak about how you can prepare yourself for that. So I think religious communities in particular have an important role to play in articulating a way in which communities can be resilient. Unfortunately, once again, oftentimes resilience is reduced to making sure that the different types of physical structures that you have will resist Hurricane Sandy here on the East Coast, will resist it. But there are human structures, human families, and other creatures within that community that need to be prepared to have resilience as well. They can be broken by the storms, by the extreme weather events, lives disrupted and displaced. All these things have to come into play. So when we speak about resilience, I think we need to focus on the importance of not the physical barriers, but the ways in which we're able to empower people to live in a new normal, in which that which happened in the past, the way in which the world functioned in the past, is not going to quite function the same. And part of that resilience is learning to be different in the world than we are now. learning in our relationship with the world than we are now. We cannot do the same old, and expect that we're going to survive or future generations to survive. So I think the idea of resilience is something that religious teachings can speak to. And one final word is, in a very practical way, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy here in New Jersey, the various types of tornadoes and fires that have hit different parts of the country. If you go to those areas and you say, I want to help, Flint, Michigan, with the water situation, I want to help, you will be often directed to a physical structure that has a cross on it, or a Star of David, or a crescent and a star, or some other symbol of a religious community. That's where people go to have shelter when their homes are destroyed, because the structures are usually stronger. That's where people go to get the food that they need, the water that they need, the bed that they need to sleep in, and the counsel, spiritual counsel and pastoral care that they need in order to be able to survive until they're able to get to some sense of new normal. So in a physical way, our physical structures of our religious institutions play a role, in a sense, a beachhead for the communities against and to ameliorate the effects of climate disasters that are striking, of course, much more frequently than ever before because of the realities of climate change and global warming. So those are sort of my thoughts on sustainability and resilience at this point, and I look forward to hearing more from all of you.
Ngozi, we've had an interesting experience this past year of the pandemic here in Los Angeles, which as a enormous city has been quite heavily affected, although we did benefit, I think, from government and people who took very serious actions and who have been very cautious about mask wearing, vaccination, and so on. But nonetheless, back in March, when we were watching the devastation in New York City, I remember there was suddenly a period when we were told not even to go to the grocery store. And at the same time, our church community, our Unitarian Universalist church community, was reorganizing itself and trying to figure out what was going on. And one of the things we realized in our Green Living Committee is that we'd been talking for many years about plant-based diets and about the importance of organic local produce and of supporting this environmental justice partner that I mentioned in South LA with their efforts to provide healthy organic food in a much lower income neighborhood. And we suddenly realized we could do a real partnership where they would help us out and we would help them out, because they had to close almost all their programs. They had very little income coming in. But the one thing they did still do is their community-based agriculture, produce delivery. So we actually organized a little co-op of people with one of us who would go to South LA, pick up the organic produce, pay them very generously for it at sort of twice the South LA rate, bring it back, deliver it to people here in a kind of friendly way in our garage, where we all got to see friends and neighbors and people from the church, and avoid, what was supposedly at that moment, very dangerous situation of congregating in grocery stores. But it turned into a social ritual for us. It turned into also an opportunity to really make those changes in our diet that we've been advocating but not 100% following. And it turned into a great way to support their work as well, and to recognize that this was not us, being charitable towards them. It was like really them helping us out, and yet strengthening both organizations. So to me, that was really kind of turning point in a way in our partnership. We had been working with them for many years, I think 4 or 5 years, giving them help with a green remodel of a building in South LA that they turned into a produce market, community kitchen, community room, and offices for food stamps and other programs. And that was a wonderful project to be involved in, and pretty astounding to watch something go from just a concept to reality. But this was really where we developed this sort of ongoing partnership that I think is going to be the stepping stone for even deeper connections. So I think, to me, that kind of ability to think about, so what is, the situation has changed. It's dangerous to go out, and yet people need connection. And people need even that kind of informal interaction that you get when you pick up your grocery bag and exchange a little bit of gossip. And to me, that's been kind of an interesting test of all of us. Our particular congregation, weirdly enough, we used to have about 150 people come to the church, which is one of the largest ones in Los Angeles. We now actually have 600 people tuning into our services, which are now online. So in a weird way, I think the crisis of the pandemic and the need to kind of completely rethink how you do things, and the real importance of community and connection when things are frightening and need to be rethought and we're all feeling our way forward, has provided a certain opportunity here for religious organizations, and also I think for climate action, because people have tried different things and they've become very conscious of what they need for survival and what they do not, and how they can live differently, how they can not drive, how they can stay at home, what they truly need versus all that stuff that kept us busy before. I only hope we can kind of hold on to some of that wisdom and some of that appreciation for smaller things as we go into the next phase of this year, and really try to realize some of those transformational changes in behavior that dealing with climate action really imply that we will need to be able to make. But it's been an interesting opportunity to rehearse, shall we say, and to learn.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alison. I think to sum it up as well, I think that's something I've really been noticing too, is how this has really shown the light on that need for collective social and financial resiliency, and how that has, when it's been able to happen, has made a huge difference in folks' ability to weather. And of course, doesn't always make enough difference, but it can. I think there are some really important differences between sustainability and resilience. And I also think they're not exact. And I think there's important differences, and I think that they're instructive. And I also think that they're also, though, even within the differences, aimed at different things. I mean, so first, I mean, one of the things that immediately comes to mind in a religious context when I think about sustainability is, what does it mean to sustain or to be sustained? And one of the blessings in Jewish tradition, that's one of the most common, is the Shechianu, which is a blessing we say when you're either doing something for the first time ever, or sort of it's a new cycle. So like usually if it's the first time in a year that you've done something, then you sort of you can say Shechianu again. And that word, it's the Hebrew is v'kiyamanu, which is, it's the blessing. Part of the blessing is thanking God for bringing us to this place or this point in time, and for sustaining us. So there is that sort of existential backdrop to it. And I think how sustainability most commonly is used now is not that. And that's one of the issues that I have with the word. I mean, I do think it's an important concept, but I think most often it becomes something that is, it's part of a consumerist extractive economy. And it's this question of how much can we extract without taking too much, but it's still fundamentally like, we're like rolling the dice. It's like, can we take this much? What about a little bit more? And we like really don't know, first of all, how much, right? But it also, it's even if we're saying, okay, we have to take less, we have to do blah, 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 right? It's still it's assuming that flow from whatever the other side is going to continue, right? And so I think we really need to think about models that are regenerative, and are thinking about not only how do we not take too much, but how do we actually close the loop so that we are feeding the system again. I think that's really critical. So with resilience, I think a few things that come to mind for me, and so one other thing with sustainability, like I think sustainability feels like a very technically oriented language. And there are technical aspects to the work we need to do, but I think the bigger work is that we really need cultural transformation. And I don't know that sustainability gets us there. Resilience, I think, is part of it. I don't think it's all of it. But I think it's an important sort of trait that we need to be really thinking about. A couple of things I think about when I think about resiliency. One is just like thinking about the ability to bend without breaking. So I think about bamboo and like tensile strength, and just that ability to flex, right, and to bend and and to either keep a different shape or to come back, right, without breaking. I think about that. And then the other thing that really comes up for me is thinking about back to my landscape architecture days is coastal resiliency is something that comes up a lot, especially when we're talking about climate, and thinking about the difference between ecologically resilient coastlines versus technical fixes to coastlines. So we think about a hard seawall, that's a technical engineered fix. But it's the same question as sustainability. It's like, how high do we have to make the seawall so that the water doesn't go over the top? But it's a guessing game. And two, the problem with it is if it works great until it doesn't. And then if the water comes over the top, or if it breaks, you're done. The water's in, so much for the seawall, right? It's a very technical solution, as opposed to solutions that really think at the entire systems level of actually, sometimes we need to let the water in, first of all. And it's thinking about how are we planning our communities, right? What are we planting? Are we tapping into the natural cycles of estuaries and riparian zone? It's the things that are actually built to receive water and let water go, and all of the conditions that are actually built to thrive in that, as opposed to constantly trying to put barriers between things. And I think that to me is really critical. We have to think about how do we actually build the systems that are in alignment with just nature, which is in a constant state of change and flux. And I think that to me is the core of resiliency, is that being able to move with that, and not to assume that we'll ever get to a point where this is it, we fixed it, we don't have to do anything else, we're good. It's actually, no, that will never be the case. We always have to change is inevitable. Nature is dynamic. There's no such thing as it's also thinking about old school ecology. There's no such thing as a climax forest. We thought at one point, and then we're oh, that's not right. There are patterns, there are trends, but then volcano comes through and the whole thing starts again. You know what I mean? It's always constantly changing. And so I think some of the words that were said just about the way that our religious spiritual traditions give us some of the frameworks, the languages, the practices to, I think, to be in that practice of preparing for, of just being in the unknown, of being able to be comfortable in discomfort, right? To have ability to center ourselves through practices when we feel that sort of like the pulling off center, right? It's like I have the practice, whether it's through music or through movement or through breath work or through prayer, whatever it is, to like recenter myself and like sort of find and hold on to my own center, to sort of put my own roots down, right, and have those sort of tether me in place.
Yeah, these are all amazing thoughts. I saw like a little round of applause as a response to what you were saying, Yoshi, and I feel the same way about everything that you all have said already. I absolutely love the conversation, the discourse here. And I want to dive into the more like action item based part of this, right? So I want to ask you all, how have you seen yours or other places of worship that you're familiar with really tackle these issues and build climate resilient spaces in their own places of worship? And if you all would like to dream with me for a little bit, because I consider myself a dreamer, I love just really creating visions of what could be. What could we do in the future? You know, like what do you think is up next for what when it comes to climate resiliency in places of worship? And anyone can take this first.
Well, one of our, as I mentioned, one of our big challenges in Santa Monica is we are living in probably one of the most expensive places to live in the United States. So for a church community that basically has to pay as it goes for any improvements to its buildings or grounds, it's incredibly difficult to make those changes and upgrades to our, kind of crumbling and falling apart historic buildings. But one of the most interesting things that happened along the way after, much committee work and false starts is we were envisioning that we would build this whole building for our religious exploration classes, which are for both children and adults. And we would wedge it into our very dense campus. If any of you who have clicked on the slideshow can see just how tight it is. I mean, we literally have no parking, a big courtyard, thank God, but very little spare space for anything. And what we ended up discovering is we didn't have the money. So instead we built kind of a shade structure, and it has become one of the busiest parts of our campus. So it was kind of a lesson in rethinking what is really needed at the most basic level. And ironically, it's probably going to become one of the busiest parts of our campus as we reopen, because it's completely safe for people to gather there, because the wind blows like crazy through it. It's the place where we pack lunches for the hungry. It's the place where we have committee meetings. It's the place where the kids plant their vegetables. And it's an accident in a way. It was a temporary thing on the way to something more permanent and respectable and expensive, which in the end could not be built. So a lot of times, one of the things we learn as architects is, you never quite know what's going to happen with the economy or the pandemic or the client or the contractor, and things may just turn out differently. And that ability to kind of figure out what is the absolute, essential need. It turned out for our particular congregation, and we're lucky that we're in a very mild climate. What was important for us was all that courtyard open space and that one place with the shade structure. So it's kind of a good reminder that there are many ways to do this, and that resiliency and that ability to kind of adapt and rethink is pretty precious and increasingly needed. So it's a little bit of a lesson for me too as an architect, because a lot of times in California, the way we get to sustainability, ironically, is through building codes and green codes and requirements, all of which inevitably make building more complicated, and I have to admit it, more expensive, not necessarily because they're inherently more expensive, but you're teaching people new things and you're kind of forcing the process faster than it naturally goes. And sometimes it can be counterproductive. Sometimes I wish we could get to people with a carrot instead of a stick. But one way or another, California is getting there. I guess we just have the we have the special role in the United States of being the cutting edge. And as Ngozi is probably discovering, within California, Santa Monica is the cutting edge of the cutting edge with sustainability. And it's sometimes a very painful place to be because you're learning the whole time and you're making mistakes. But I guess we just have to stay humble and learning from each other.
Yeah, for sure. I absolutely love that perspective. Yeah, I do feel that Santa Monica does feel like the cutting edge of the cutting edge, and it's not always fun all the time, but it's definitely always a learning experience. Yoshi, Sapit, thoughts on this?
In deference to the legacy of the Abrahamic faith traditions, Abraham was there first.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, also looking at your questions list, and this sort of also answers. I don't know if this is the next one you were going to, Ngozi, but question also on racial justice and climate justice. I think these need to be like linked answers, and so I think there's been a lot of work that I've been not necessarily directly involved with, but like organizations that I've worked for, that's been pieces of that, of the, I think of the greening solutions, which again are important pieces, whether that be through like the building practices, green infrastructure, and I think those are important for places of worship because they're important for everywhere. It's like our entire built environment needs to be integrating this stuff. So this is a good place, for us to lead, through our values. I think for me, something that feels, I don't know if it's more important, but certainly equally as important, in terms of the resiliency and sustainability, is what are the ways in which our community spaces are in deep relationship, are deep relationship, and are modeling, and are like modeling the types of communities and the types of spaces that move into that like visionary space, right? That show the sort of microcosm of what can be possible in the bigger world. And so there's sort of like there's an internal focus and an external focus to that. And I think internally, this is thinking, what are our practices, whether that be on the environmental side in terms of environmental impacts, carbon footprint, like et cetera. How are we in relationship to, what's our building doing? What's the impact doing? How do we use our green spaces, right? Like, how are we in relationship with nature through our spaces and the work that we're doing? And then from the social, equity and diversity side, then it's also really important to be thinking about do our communities model diverse, equitable, just communities, right? Who are the people like that are who are people that are not only welcome, but like have the seats at the table, right? The voices that are being elevated. So I think this all sort of really ties together. And I think that we just need more of that sort of integrated thinking. And so there are ways in which that can be focused internally, but I think there's also the external focus, which is like, what is that context? What is that relationship to the communities that surround that place of worship, right, to the ecosystems that surround that place of worship, right? I think we see places that get into a lot of trouble because they ignore that context. And I think that it doesn't matter, right? They think that like, this is our building, this is our plot of land, you know, like, can our community get from wherever they are to here? Like, cool, great, right? And that's not only is that socially irresponsible, I think at the end of the day, it's environmentally irresponsible, because these are the ways in which that leads to exploitative, harmful patterns play out. They play out and they manifest in different ways, but they're part of the same sort of fundamental core issue. So I think, to me, when I see those places that are really prioritizing those things that have a certain level of porosity between sort of like, I think you have to, like, you need to have the particular, like you have to have, this is what we are, this is what we're about, this is like why you would want to come and like be involved in our community and not a different one. Like, that's totally fair and normal. You have to do that on some level, otherwise nobody knows why to, like, what are you doing? You know, but I think you have to keep also that openness and again, being in a relationship with others, knowing that we're sort of all in it together.
Affirming a lot which my sisters and brothers have just said. I think for me, in terms of the practice, they said, I think it was attributed to Durkheim. I don't know if it's truly attributable to him, but it's sort of that religion is ritual. And in one sense, I think that that's true. We come together for breaking of bread, but we also come together for liturgy and for social interaction with one another. But part of religion is ritual. That which ultimately draws us to that place of worship is the ritual. And like, as I mentioned, we're finding ourselves now in the first and second set of 10 days of the month of Ramadan for the Muslim community. It's sort of like a 30-day spiritual boot camp, I like to call it, in which the focus, like all fasting practices, part of it is to restrain oneself from food, from drink, and from other, we use the word, various types of desires, material desires, physical desires, so that the spiritual part of us can grow and can develop and can be nourished. This idea of ethics of restraint and conservation is part and parcel, I think, of all religious practices. All religions have part of that as part of some of their practices. And I think the opposite is what the material overconsumption world that we live in is, you know, follow your muse. It doesn't matter how you fuel it, you know, just more is better, less is not better. So what we did was we and different Muslim groups around the United States organically sort of developed in different Muslim communities to say, we need to recapture and reappropriate the teachings of Ramadan during Ramadan and share that with the rest of the community, because conspicuous consumption has seeped into our lifestyles. It is part of the American lifestyle. Every political party and every president promises we're going to have more for the next generation, meaning more consumption and more waste. That's what it translates to. And the idea is that we can do more with less is something that is contradictory to the whole model of the political economy in which we function, and the mindset. And so I think Ramadan provides an opportunity, provide Muslim community an opportunity where they begin to focus different organically formed green teams here and there and green groups to say, we have to say Ramadan is a time when less is more. We need to readopt the ethic of conservation and restraint, and we'll focus on specific areas. And Muslims tended to highlight, once again, the prophetic example. I think all of our religious traditions have the jewels and the wisdom teachings within them, not all of them, but within them. I mean, not all the wisdom teachings contained with any particular religion, but within them that allow us, enable us to be better in the world than we are now, to be more eco-conscious as we walk through the world. And so specifically during the month of Ramadan, these various green Muslim groups would And the last 2 years obviously have been difficult, this year and last year, especially when our homes became our mosques in a sense, because we couldn't go to the mosque physically. This year that there's been, it's opening up with necessary COVID restrictions and precautions in place. And that was, he said, listen, how is it the way we interact with the natural world, with creation on a regular basis in our rooms like this, air conditioned vehicles and so on? How do we actually interact with the natural world? The answer is through food. So food serves many purposes, but one of the purposes is the way we interact with the natural world. Well, how did the prophet interact with the natural world in that context? The answer is less meat, more veggies, in a nutshell. More vegetable diets. That was part of the prophetic practice. Why cannot that be part of our practice? So as people began to have iftars, which is a time of coming together and breaking bread and thanking God for the many blessings, said, well, how are we thanking him for these blessings? How are we thanking God for those blessings? We have to thank it in a way in which it is respectful for the blessing itself. And how is it respectful of the blessing itself? I need to be more conscious about a more plant-based diet, not exclusively within the Muslim teachings, although we have Muslim vegetarians and Muslim vegans, but more of a plant-based diet than a meat-based diet. So the iftars have to be ones in which we break our fast more on dates and vegetables than on meats. Secondly, waste cannot be a part of the process. So everything that we utilize in terms of serving, in terms of eating, either at the home or at other places, needs to be utilized in such a way that we have what we encourage Muslims to do, and within a different mosque, is a zero waste iftar. So even the leftovers, we say they're leftars, either they're going to be used another day for another iftar, or shared with those who are in need, that which has not been touched by our eating, or it needs to be composted. It needs to utilize, for example, stepping away from practices of the idea of giving is great, but giving in a styrofoam dish is not great. So the idea of them pulling that practice back and raising the consciousness for the Muslims that are coming to prayer in the evening prayers, especially during the month of Ramadan, already more sympathetic to hearing these teachings and their practices. We look for conservation of water. Water is a limited resource. 60 million Americans, it's not just in Flint, Michigan, 60 million of our fellow Americans do not have access regularly to clean water. This is, and we're in so-called in the first world. So the challenges, I think, are great. So we said, listen, we need to conserve water. How do you conserve water? Well, Muslims make a ritual ablution like other faith traditions have before the prayer services. We call it the wudu, ritual ablution. And the amount of water that is utilized in making that ritual ablution is, I don't want to use the word, it's not just wasteful, it's sort of insane. And bringing attention to Muslims to say, listen, my respected uncle, my respected auntie, as we like to call our elders within the community, the prophetic wudu was within 2 cups of water. 2 cups of water. How much water are you running per minute? And so in these practices, the idea is that people develop a consciousness of environmental sustainability in the basic little things that I do in life. So if I ritually make wudu, as I go to the bathroom, I'm thinking about how am I impacting the environment? How did the prophet do it? As I'm sitting down to dinner, I'm looking at the meat on my plate and saying, that's not supposed to be here. That's not supposed to be here. I can break bread in a better way. And how then do we continue those practices after Ramadan? So for within the Muslim community, we encourage what they call the Green Ramadan campaign to take place. And then the rituals continue after Ramadan. Can we continue to keep those rituals eco-friendly? And can the place which we came to pray together in be a place that is more environmentally just and fair? And what we were able to do last year, working with different groups within the Muslim community in different parts of the country, something that really was surprising during the Trump administration. We were able to work together and partner with the EPA, his gutted EPA, and develop a workbook for Muslim congregations and communities. Like many religious communities, we have many physical assets, buildings. Buildings are major contributors to energy consumption and also to energy emissions, So the combination of the two, I don't remember the percentages, I have the architects here, 20%, 30%. Buildings are a major contributor to greenhouse gases and to energy consumption. So how do we make them more efficient? The EPA has a wonderful program, but it was sort of put under the covers during the Trump administration, in which they try to work with faith communities to grant them Energy Star or certifications for their buildings. A lot of retrofitting, there's a lot of putting into place practices and procedures that are not there. And we were able to work with the EPA, those who were not yet removed by Trump, and be able to put in place a congregational workbook. We have 300 plus full-time Islamic schools, plus over 2,000 mosques around the country of different sizes, different square footage, and having them put into place green practices that are reinforced or informed by their religious teachings as well. So we're very happy about this. It was launched, like I said, in September last year during the Trump administration publicly. And we're looking forward to continuing to practice these hopefully eco-friendly practices outside of Ramadan. But I think the most important takeaway for me is making it part of people's consciousness. I mean, who thinks when they go to the bathroom that I should think about environmental issues? When I sit down to dinner, environmental issues, but it has to become part of the practice within our lifestyles, because the lifestyles need to change. We need to have a reset with regard to the way in which we are being within the world, and it needs to be one which is in more harmony, and it needs to push back against the idea of consumption. The 3 R's you're all very familiar with, right? Reduce, recycle.
Right.
Reduce, recycle, reuse. Well, in the Muslim Green Ramadan campaign, we added 2 more: rethink and refuse. We celebrate the ending of Ramadan by Eid. We're supposed to get new clothes to celebrate Eid. We say, why do we need to get new clothes to celebrate Eid? There's a whole bunch of energy that goes into, and materials that go into, and unjust labor practices that go as slave labor practices around the world that go into getting these clothing that I show off to others. Why do I need new clothes? Why can't we circulate them? So we're starting a new program to say the Prophet wear new clothes every Ramadan, every Eid celebration. The answer is no. Let's begin to put that into practice. In a small way, it's pushing back. But if you eventually reach 1.7 billion people around the world, it's a huge way to push back against the inequities in our society and the wrongful practices that bring something as simple as clothes on my body. But it's a way also to cause us to rethink these clothes that I'm wearing. Who produced them? Where were they produced? Was there slave labor involved? Were there child labor involved? How were these materials energized? What was the energy of the factories that had to produce these? And sort of begin to make our daily rituals and practices, the mundane, connected to the environmental practices which we should be changing in order to make a better world, in order to make a world that will survive us, survive our children and our great-grandchildren, and it will be something that will nourish them and not harm them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I loved your answer for that. And Terrence, actually, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing that right. Is it Terrence? I don't know if Terrence is still here. But there was a really great comment in the chat about how there are 2 concerns about this discussion, right? So often people don't know the situation that we're in, right? They lack the urgency, they lack the information. So that kind of means that the actions around the situation are kind of like lacking. They're sluggish because people don't know, or people aren't aware of how important it is, right? And then we have this second issue where people who are religious often see this systemic issue, these ideas of these large systems functioning in tandem with religion. They see it as something maybe like trivial or something that doesn't matter, or things that don't intersect. So as we round up on the end of this panel, I would love to hear y'all's answers for how attendees can really start driving the conversation and lighting a fire under the people in their congregations, people in their communities, to really have these conversations, and not just in a surface level way, but in a meaningful way that actually creates changes so we can move forward out of this position that we're in right now.
This is something that I've been, wrestling with literally for for a while now as the leader of this Green Living group, and specifically before every Earth Sunday service, which is the one that is coming up in a few days for me. One of the things we really recognize is that reinforcing the need, and really almost the personal need, for these changes in personal behavior that kind of bring us into alignment with our values, I think is very, very important. It tends to inspire others. It kind of reinforces our commitment. But I completely agree with what Terrence is saying, that we've gotten to such a crisis with the climate issue that it really is not within any, even if we all suddenly became vegans and, bicycled everywhere and did absolutely every green living tip in the book, we could not solve this problem. We need to get political organizations, we need to change our economic system, we need the kind of really broad shift that only governments and politicians and organizations can do. Here in California, we've certainly made some progress, but we need to continue political pressure and go faster and more ambitiously. For example, to move away from fossil fuels. And one of the tools that we've been using, in addition to kind of that reinforcing each other in terms of kind of modeling a greener way of life, is we've been using the tool of the book Drawdown, and a very specific online tool that is called the Drawdown Eco Challenge. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it here. It's quite a helpful educational tool in kind of in helping people realize the scope of the problem and the nature of the solutions, and then try to chisel away at it in their own, personal way, and try to get everybody else in their circle on board to do what they can. So it's not perfect by any means, and we actually have sort of better tools in some ways that are specific to California, but I've been using that as an educational tool to kind of open people's mind, if they're kind of fixated on, recycling or water conservation or some specific aspect on the bigger picture and the absolute urgent need to address the greenhouse gas emissions crisis. So I'd recommend that. Thank you, Ngozi, for posting it. That's done.
Yoshi, I'd love to hear from you on this. I know you lead a really diverse collective of people, multi-generational, multiracial. What are your thoughts?
Thanks. Yeah. I think we need to hold, multiple truths. We need to hold the multitudes. I absolutely agree. We need the systems level, policy, economic, we can't do it without that. And so I absolutely believe that's true. And it's people who drive those changes, right? And so I absolutely, I get it. I feel sometimes drives me off the wall when I see the very convenient over emphasis only on individual actions, right? Because guess who that leaves off the hook, right? It's big corporations, it's government, et cetera. So I absolutely agree. And so I think it's also holding that while we do need these, I think we need the policy and systems things so that actually we don't, we actually don't need to ensure that all 7 whatever billion people are intimately, deeply familiar with all the issues. Like, actually, on some level, I actually don't care that everyone knows. Even like, also, maybe it's not realistic, but also even like, because if we have systems that are in place where actually you don't need to know all of the everything, you're plugged in and you're just part of a system that is healthy and flourishing and regenerative, etc. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I think actually sometimes we get in our own way when we think that the biggest barrier is like the knowledge, right? And like getting people to know more. Like you can get into a rut of just learning more. And also it's the same thing with racial justice. Like you can read books on racial equity and anti-racism forever, and that can actually actively block you from just beginning to do the things that we need to be doing, the actions and behaviors to put it into the world. So I think that so I think we need to be doing all those things. I think we need to hold that I imagine on some level this is true for for the other faiths that are represented here as well. I know certainly for how I view Judaism, it's sort of like what we sometimes call our environmental ethics of Judaism, but it's like what's our obligation for the ecology of myself, to what's my obligation to other people, what's my obligation to the natural world and the like economic like resources that we're all utilizing. But of course the secret is like, well, what else is there? Right? So it's not just an environmental view, it's like actually everything. But I think also it's like, well, if that's politics, then yeah, like, and if my faith, if my religious tradition, my cultural traditions aren't giving me some guidance in terms of how I think about and approach these things, which is by definition political, then what good is it? So I think I think it's the people who want to keep politics out of the pews, so to speak, are the folks that it's really convenient to not be bringing up things, right? And the very last thing I'll say is I do think, just going back to, we absolutely need the systems and the policy level, and we have to hold that, like, when we find these moments of like what we call like making a tikkun, the tikkun olam, like making a tikkun, making a repair of like bringing more wholeness, even if it's in the micro moment, that's still very real. And those are the things that add up. And I think we need to also be careful not to be like, oh, well, that was only this tiny little thing, sort of like the universe in a grain of sand. Like, those things are still really real. And so we sort of just have to hold those multiple truths and different scales of things.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And we are right at the end of our time. So I want to give a virtual round of applause to all of our panelists that joined us today, and also all of our guests that joined us for this conversation as well. Thank you so much. We couldn't do it without you. And if you all want to check out what our speakers are doing, go ahead and head to SCED online, and you'll be able to check out their bios, see what work that they do in print, so you can Google, get in contact with them, anything as you wish. Yeah, go ahead and connect in the chat, leave contact information if you wish, any last minute questions. But thank you so much for everyone attending, and thank you all. Thank you to the panelists as well. Have a good night.